Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your source material and find the essential insights. Today, we're diving into a stack of notes and excerpts on a thinker who completely challenged how we think about organizations and leadership, even way back in the 1930s.
That's right. We've got some really fascinating material here focused on Chester's Barnard, his background, his core ideas, and surprisingly, how relevant they still are today.
So our mission in his deep dive is to cut through the complexity and pull out the absolute core of Barnard's thinking. Things like, what is an organization really?
Uh-huh.
Where does authority actually come from? And what should an executive truly be doing? We're aiming to give you the essential understanding without needing to pore over all the source material yourself. Ready to jump into some potentially mind-bending ideas?
Let's do it. And I think to really get the ideas, it helps to know a little about the person behind them.
Absolutely. The source material makes it clear Chester Barnard wasn't, an academic tucked away somewhere.
Not at all.
He was a hands-on executive, rising all the way to president of New Jersey Bell, a major telecommunications company back then. What's really striking is that he actually left Harvard without a degree, yet he became this incredibly influential management theorist.
That's such a crucial point. He's a classic practitioner scholar. He wasn't just theorizing from afar. He was integrating his real-world executive experience with deep reading across sociology, psychology, philosophy.
Right. He drew from everywhere.
Yeah, and he was influenced by people like Elton Mayo from the famous Hawthorne studies and Mary Parker Follett, another pioneering management thinker.
And all of this experience and study came together in his major work, published in 1938, called The Functions of the Executive. That book, it laid the groundwork for so many ideas we still wrestle with.
It absolutely did. And perhaps the most fundamental idea in the book, which really set him apart, is his definition of an organization itself.
Okay.
He didn't see it primarily as a structure or a building or, an org chart. He defined an organization as a system of consciously coordinated activities. Activities?
By two or more people towards a common purpose.
Okay, wait. Consciously coordinated activities. So he's saying an organization isn't a thing, but what people are doing together.
Precisely. It exists only when people are willing to coordinate their efforts towards a shared goal. And for this system to even come into being and continue, he said 3 essential conditions must be met.
3 essential conditions for an organization to exist. What are they?
First, there has to be a willingness to contribute. Individuals have to actively choose to offer their effort and participation.
Okay, willingness. Got it.
Second, there needs to be that common purpose, shared objectives that everyone's efforts are directed towards.
Right, a shared goal.
And third, communication. Effective channels are necessary to coordinate those individual contributions and keep everyone aligned on the purpose.
Willingness, purpose, communication. That makes sense. He also talked about 2 sides of the same coin with organizations, formal and informal.
Right. The formal organization is what we usually think of. The plan structure, the roles, the departments. It's deliberate. The org chart stuff.
Exactly. But the informal organization, that's the spontaneous social interactions, the relationships, the unofficial networks that develop naturally within the formal structure.
So like the friendships you make at work, the unofficial mentor relationships, the grapevine.
Exactly. And Barnard argued the informal organization is absolutely crucial. It facilitates formal communication, helps build morale and a sense of belonging, and provides that cohesion that formal structures alone can't achieve. You can't just ignore the water cooler dynamics.
That shifts the perspective quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all built on his view of the individual within the organization, how he saw people.
Yes, he saw individuals as having limitations, sure, but also as inherently social, autonomous, and purposeful. They're not just cogs in a machine.
Not just resources.
No, they cooperate when their personal goals and needs can be met or aligned by participating in the organization.
And this brings us to that concept of the contribution satisfaction equilibrium, right? That idea that people are constantly sort of evaluating their involvement.
Yes, it's foundational to understanding motivation from his perspective. Individuals are deciding, often unconsciously, if the satisfaction or inducements they're receiving from the organization are enough to justify the contribution or effort they're putting in.
So it's a balancing act.
Yeah.
What kind of inducements are we talking about? Is it just about the paycheck?
No, absolutely not. That was one of his big criticisms of simpler views of motivation. He broke inducements down. There are specific ones, things like material rewards, the actual working conditions, or prestige.
Okay, the tangible stuff.
Right. But there are also general ones like opportunities for participation, a sense of social comfort and belonging, recognition, or feeling like you're part of something meaningful. It's the whole package of what the organization offers the individual.
And that balance is always dynamic, always shifting, depending on the person and the context.
It is, and that's where the executive comes in. Barnard argued that the executive's primary tool in managing this equilibrium isn't command, but persuasion.
Persuasion.
Yeah, it's about aligning those individual interests with the organizational purpose.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, pretty radical, even today. This leads directly to his idea about authority.
Hmm.
We usually think authority flows down from the top, from the boss's position. But Barnard flipped that completely.
He did. His acceptance theory of authority is probably his most famous and enduring contribution. He argued that authority doesn't reside in the person giving the order or the position they hold.
Okay.
Authority, he said, exists only if and when the subordinate accepts the order.
So the authority isn't with me just because I'm the manager, it's with you because you decide to follow my direction.
Exactly. It flows up from the consent of the subordinate, not down from the positional power of the executive. This introduces the zone of indifference.
The zone of indifference? What's that?
That's the range of orders that an individual will accept without question because they fall within what they consider reasonable, expected, or consistent with their understanding of the job or organizational purpose.
The stuff you just do because it's part of the deal.
Right. Orders within that zone are accepted pretty much automatically.
But what about orders that fall outside that zone? The ones that might feel unusual or difficult or even questionable.
That's where acceptance becomes crucial. Barnard said an order outside the zone of indifference can still be accepted, but it has to meet certain conditions to be perceived as legitimate by the subordinate.
Okay, so there are conditions for acceptance. What are those?
The source material outlines 4. First, the order must be understood by the recipient. They have to know what's being asked.
Makes sense.
Second, it must be compatible with the overall organizational purpose as they understand it.
Okay, it can't seem totally random or counterproductive.
Third, it must be perceived by the recipient as consistent with their personal interests, or at least not severely opposed to them.
Right, it shouldn't actively harm them or go against their core values.
And finally, the recipient must be physically and mentally able to comply with it. It has to be feasible.
Understood, compatible with purpose, aligned with personal interest, and feasible. Wow.
If any of those conditions aren't met, acceptance is unlikely.
That fundamentally changes the job of leadership, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It means executives can't just command. They have to actively earn and negotiate acceptance.
Exactly. Authority isn't a given. It's something you constantly build and maintain through consent.
And that leads directly to another concept Barnard saw as absolutely central: communication.
Yes. Central to the executive's role and the whole functioning of the organization.
So communication isn't just something leaders do, it's fundamental to this whole system working.
Precisely. As the source material notes, for Barnard, communication is authority. Effective communication isn't just a tool, it's the very mechanism that creates cohesion, allows purpose to be shared, and enables that acceptance of authority we just talked about.
Without it, the system just falls apart.
Pretty much. It breaks down. He even had principles for effective communication systems, didn't he?
He did. Things like ensuring known channels, clear, accessible lines of communication so people know how to reach each other.
Mm-hmm.
Short lines, which he sometimes called the least distance principle, minimizing the number of people a message has to go through. Reduces distortion, I guess.
Right. Keeps it clearer. And continuity and authentication, making sure the flow is uninterrupted and messages are verified, trustworthy.
And competence centers having capable individuals at the points where information is processed and directed, like skilled managers or hubs.
Exactly. You need people who know what to do with the information at those key notes.
And linking back to the formal-informal idea, communication happens through both channels, right?
Right.
He didn't discount the informal.
Absolutely not. The formal follows the planned hierarchy, sure. But the informal channels, the networks, the relationships are vital for rapid feedback, boosting morale, and often solving problems more creatively or quickly than formal routes might allow.
So executives need to understand and even maybe leverage both.
Definitely. They need to be aware of and utilize both.
Okay, so given this whole view of organizations as these cooperative systems built on individual contribution, satisfaction, and acceptance of authority, all facilitated by communication, what does Barnard say executives are actually supposed to be doing? What are their core functions?
That's the title of his book, after all, The Functions of the Executive. He outlined 3 primary functions. First, establishing and maintaining that system of communication.
Okay, job one. Keep the information flowing.
Yes. The executive is the central node, the hub that keeps information flowing and coordinating action.
The ultimate communicator, basically.
In large part, yes. Second, securing essential services from individuals. This is where they actively manage that contribution satisfaction equilibrium we talked about earlier.
Keeping people willing to contribute.
Right. Offering incentives, building morale, using persuasion to ensure people choose to offer their effort.
And the third function.
Formulating and defining organizational purpose and objectives.
Defining the purpose. That feels like the big picture strategic stuff. The why.
It is. And he saw it as an interactive process, not something just dictated from the top down. And crucially, for Barnard, formulating purpose had a significant moral dimension.
Well, how so?
It wasn't just about efficiency or profit maximization. It involved ethical considerations and thinking about the broader social good the organization serves, or at least its impact.
So the executive isn't just a manager of tasks. They're a leader with a moral compass. That's quite a responsibility.
Absolutely. He described the executive as an amateur psychologist, someone who needs to understand human motivations and how to balance competing individual and organizational needs.
An amateur psychologist. I like that.
Yeah. Their role is more about balancing and facilitating the social system than simply dictating orders. They inspire commitment to purpose through both clear communication and their own integrity. Planning, too, was tied to this defining ends, assessing feasibility, considering resources and uncertainties, all aligned with fostering contribution and satisfaction.
So the ultimate goal for Barnard wasn't just growth or size, was it? It feels like something else was more important.
No, you're right. He saw survivability as the ultimate test of an organization's efficiency and effectiveness.
Survivability. Just keeping the thing going.
Exactly. Could the system continue to function and adapt over time? And that survivability depended directly on those core pillars: common purpose, willingness to contribute, and effective communication. He also had an early sense of the open systems perspective, recognizing that organizations interact with and must adapt to their external environment. They don't exist in a vacuum.
And decision-making played into this survivability, too.
Yes. He distinguished between personal decisions, like an individual choosing to join or leave the organization, that contribution satisfaction thing again,
Right.
and organizational decisions. These are the strategic choices made by executives at those communication centers. And these decisions involve balancing moral considerations related to purpose with opportunistic ones related to the environment, the practical realities.
Moral and opportunistic. Interesting pairing.
Yeah, and he even acknowledged that sometimes, especially with insufficient data, these crucial organizational decisions might be non-logical, based on judgment, intuition, experience, rather than pure step-by-step rationality.
Including that moral dimension in decision-making feels really forward-thinking for the 1930s.
It really was. He stressed that executives have a profound responsibility to uphold moral standards, to reconcile different ethical codes within the organization, maybe between different groups or departments,
Yep.
and to help establish the overall organizational moral code. The moral dimension of purpose wasn't an add-on. It was baked in, integrated with the practical functions of leadership.
So how did these ideas stack up against the prevailing management theories of his time? You know, the strict hierarchical models like Weber's bureaucracy.
Barnard was quite critical of those classical theories. He saw them as too mechanistic, too focused only on structure, rules, and authority flowing rigidly top-down.
Like seeing organizations as machines.
Exactly. They completely missed, in his view, the crucial role of human dynamics, the informal systems, the complexity of motivation beyond just money, and the fundamental reality that authority depends on acceptance.
They were missing the whole human system part that he saw as central, the cooperation aspect.
Precisely. He rejected simplistic economic motivation, the idea that people only work for pay, and the assumption that authority was automatic just because of your title. He advocated for a much more adaptive, human-centric approach to leadership, one that was deeply sensitive to how people actually behave, how they interact informally, and whether they choose to grant authority.
Okay, let's bring this back to today. How do these ideas, nearly a century old now, resonate in the modern workplace? What's the legacy?
What's fascinating is how much of his framework really underpins contemporary management thinking, even if people don't always trace it back to him directly.
Like how?
Well, you see his influence in major figures who came after him, like Herbert Simon on decision-making and bounded rationality.
Okay, Simon built on Barnard.
Yeah, and Rensis Lickert's work on participative management styles, McGregor's theory, X and Y, about assumptions about workers, even in broader concepts like stakeholder theory and the focus on organizational culture.
So when we talk about things like employee engagement, psychological safety, even corporate social responsibility, that's Barnard peeking through.
Absolutely. His emphasis on the contribution satisfaction, equilibrium, and persuasion is directly related to modern employee engagement efforts, trying to understand why people choose to contribute their best effort and what incentives, beyond just salary, truly matter. Recognition, purpose, belonging.
Right, those non-material inducements.
Exactly. His recognition of the informal organization is key to understanding company culture and the social dynamics that impact things like psychological safety, feeling safe to speak up or take risks.
Makes sense.
His acceptance theory informs modern ideas about empowerment, delegation, and participatory leadership, recognizing that getting things done relies on people buying in, not just being told what to do. And his focus on the executive's moral responsibility. That's directly relevant to all the current discussions about ethical leadership, ESG, corporate governance.
Wow, okay, so the core lessons for leaders navigating the complexity of the 21st century, based on Barnard's insights, seem pretty clear then.
The sources suggest several key takeaways. Don't just rely on formal authority. Understand that you need to earn acceptance from those you lead. Recognize that motivation is complex. Use non-material incentives effectively. Prioritize building robust communication systems, both formal and informal. Be mindful of balancing the needs of the formal structure with the power and dynamics of informal networks. And finally, embrace the moral dimension of leadership and purpose as integral to long-term effectiveness and survivability.
It's a powerful, interconnected framework. It sees the organization as a whole social system. Were there any significant critiques or limitations of his work noted in the material? No theory is perfect, right?
Right. And yes, like any major theory, it's been examined critically. While his strengths are clear, the systems view, the acceptance theory, understanding motivation complexity, the centrality of communication, the moral element of leadership. Some limitations are noted.
Such as?
Well, his writing style can be quite abstract and dense, sometimes lacking concrete, practical, how-to examples in the book itself, which can make it hard to grasp initially.
Okay, more conceptual than practical guides sometimes.
Kind of. Some critics also argue that his framework might underestimate fundamental power imbalances and inequalities that exist in organizations. The acceptance theory sounds great, but does it fully account for situations where people feel they have little choice but to accept?
That's a fair point. The choice might not feel very real sometimes.
Exactly. Or that the calculus of the contribution satisfaction equilibrium is incredibly complex and may be impossible for an executive to manage perfectly for every individual. And while he identified what executives should do, he was sometimes less prescriptive on the exact how of implementing some of his more complex ideas in practice.
Okay, let's unpack what this all means for you listening right now. We've taken a deep dive into Chestar Barnard's view of organizations, not as static structures, but as dynamic cooperative systems built on individual choice, motivation, and crucially, acceptance.
Exactly. He fundamentally challenged the idea that authority is just a top-down command. Instead, he saw it flowing from the bottom up based on whether subordinates, accept the orders they receive.
Yeah.
And he cast the executive's role as this complex balancing act, facilitating communication, securing willing contributions through persuasion and varied incentives, and defining purpose with a really crucial moral dimension, being that amateur psychologist.
And we've seen how these seemingly old ideas about human nature, motivation, communication, the true source of authority, resonate powerfully in today's workplace. They show up in everything from engagement surveys to discussions about company culture and ethical leadership. It's far from just dusty theory. It's foundational to understanding why organizations actually work, or sometimes why they don't.
It serves as a constant reminder, I think, that no matter the technology or the complexity of the business, successful organizations ultimately depend on understanding and nurturing the human element, the dynamics of consent and cooperation.
So, reflecting on Barnard's acceptance theory of authority, if authority truly depends on acceptance, how does that change the way you think about leading or even being led in your own experience? Is that the reality you see playing out day to day? That's definitely something worth mulling over. That's it for this deep dive. We hope you found some valuable nuggets here.